How is everyone feeling this morning? Refreshed? Good. I understand it's a beautiful day out there if you've had a chance to walk at all this morning. So my name is Gail Hall, and the hat I'm wearing this morning is one of the co-chairs of the International Prior Learning Assessment Network for CAPLA, which I will explain in a moment. But welcome to all of you, and I just wanted to note as well that this particular session is being live webcast. So we have a number of people from other parts of the country and other parts of the world who are watching and participating in this webcast and who can actually send in questions to be answered by the panel as well. So that's always fun and interesting as long as the internet connection stays on. So to begin with, just because there are some people that are online, etc., who may not be aware of CAPLA, CAPLA is the not-for-profit membership organization for the recognition of prior learning, run by a board from across the country, very dedicated volunteer board who does a lot of work within Canada. And part of, for those of you who don't know Canada, 13 different jurisdictions with education and training systems, and therefore also how RPL relates within the education systems. So what is IPLAN? IPLAN is actually the International Prior Learning Assessment Network that CAPLA started a number of years ago because we started seeing more interest from around the world, not only in terms of participants coming to the conference, but wanting to carry on and sharing expertise, sharing ideas throughout the year, rather than just once a year, and also because a lot of people can't afford to travel to things like conferences. So out of this was the desire to share both expertise, resources, the ability to have a network to do a discussion board and say, what have you used in this situation? Do you know what is out there in this area? What happened in terms of sharing? So that's actually the result of interest from around the world. And it is, again, a volunteer network. But I will, at the end of this, go into a few things that we hope to do in the future to keep this going after this session. I will note that with this, the session is also being videotaped, so that it will be put up on the Recognition for Learning site afterwards, along with the slides from this presentation, and also on the CAPLA. So you don't need to worry about trying to take down everything from the slides. I know our speakers this morning have a lot of resources and a lot of information on the slides, and you will have access to them later. So, we'll move on. Part of what we want to take a look at here, and this particular topic we decided on for today's session, is to take a look at the start of sharing resources around the world. And so the whole theme in terms of sustainability and reuse, recycle, sharing of resources for efficiency's sake. And so we're taking a very small snapshot of a couple of places in terms of being able to share these resources. We're going to start with a little bit of the global perspective by Madhu Singh in terms of the UNESCO perspective on sharing and the global recognition. And then Margaret Cameron from the Scottish Framework is going to give you a little bit of background on that framework, and she's going to explain how they took one specific sectoral resource and made it into a generic resource within their country. Nigel Lloyd is going to talk about the use of case studies from a particular project he was working on with the construction industry and how the use of case studies within RPL. Because Australia wasn't able to get here for this conference, I'm actually going to show you one particular resource. They've been very good in terms of working with us internationally over email, and the next webcast will be at a time when they can participate. But I'm just going to show you one of their resources that actually draws together some of the things we talked about earlier. So without any more, I will pass this on to Madhu Singh.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Madhu Singh from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg. UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg is a specialized institute for literacy, non-formal education, adult learning from a lifelong learning perspective. And this morning, I'm going to share with you the UNESCO perspective on sharing and global recognition. I hope I get that. Okay. The UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning got the mandate for conducting research on recognition of prior learning from the General Conference of UNESCO. And this was in 2004. And since then, we've been conducting research on recognition, validation, accreditation of non-formal and informal learning. We set up an interagency group of experts from OECD, CEDEFOP, ILO, IDEA, the African Network, and other organizations who had expertise in RPL. We also started collecting case studies across countries worldwide, from the south and the north, and this observatory is under construction because I think RPL and National Qualification Frameworks is a work in progress, and it evolves every month, every year, and people are not sure how they should go about it. So this international observatory is still under construction, and I think now with this, that we've got into this other network for sharing, we will forge ahead with this observatory. We have the African Network. We do a lot of work in Africa, together with the French National Commission for UNESCO, because they have a particular interest in Francophonie in Africa. And we had an international survey of 44 countries, and we have a synthesis report on that. The societal context is very important. Society is in transition. It affects us all. We need a holistic approach to meet the challenges facing our societies. I think this is very important because if you look at the forces of globalization and you think about the persistent disparities between the North and South, you think about the continued underutilization that poses a real problem for individuals and society. You think about the impact this sort of a project is going to have on the hitherto marginalized groups in societies. You look at it also from the point of view of the intrinsic value for the individual as well as the instrumental value. I'll come to some of these points a little later, but I just think it is very important to put this in context of a bigger society in transition, and I think we need holistic approaches, and the program that we have in UNESCO about linking national qualification frameworks and systems and the recognition of prior learning is such an approach. There's a lot of research already done, and it is time for communities of practice to share that experience. I think when we're talking about recycling, it's also very important to recall what the UNESCO said, the statements that were made in 1972 and 1996. I mean, we had a lot written about the learning society. We have to go beyond educational systems and overhaul. It means going beyond educational systems until we reach the stage of a learning society. Then we had the Delors report, and now recently we had the Confrontier International Conference on Adult Education, and the member states from all over the world have given us, endorsed the mandate for working on guidelines for developing structures and mechanisms for the recognition of all forms of learning. It's called the Belém Framework of Action because this conference took place in Brazil in 2009. So I think lifelong learning really challenges society at the social level, personal level, educational level, economic level, and in general, it challenges us to transit to a learning society. What is learning in a learning society? It is really about raising awareness of the value of learning, recognition of competencies, validation of competencies, development of competencies, and embedding lifelong learning in all domains. Creating new routes to qualifications for adults, visibility of skills, knowledge, and competencies, tapping untapped talent. This all is not new, but I think we really need to see the purposes of our RPL: not starting from scratch, motivator for resuming formal studies, crisis assessment is a good start before recycling. What is the nature of RPL? The glass is always half filled. It is about social recognition and acceptance. Learning outcomes have value and are used in society. That is important. Recognition does not necessarily mean a high level of formalization, but it does need some continuum of outcomes from self-assessment to full certification. And of course, we have the learning partnerships between the learner, the working context, and the learning system. So this program on linking national qualification frameworks and systems and recognition of prior learning, the UNESCO program, I think we are trying to bring the top-down approaches, link the top-down approaches and the bottom-up approaches. Our definition of prior learning is learning that takes place in informal settings and equivalent learning that takes place in non-formal settings. Linking NQF with RPL, what is the main focus? The main focus is on implementation. How can the aim of creating lifelong learning societies in which NQFs as meta frameworks interact with RPL? How can powerful tools and effective practices be used by lifelong learning professionals? And how to fill in, for purposes of lifelong learning, the middle ground between NQFs and recognition of non-formal learning. So I think this sort of a diagram will tell you what the middle ground is. We are trying to link the learner with the organization and then the learning system. The learning system is where we have the national qualification frameworks, the academic, vocational, and professional standards, and we have one angle which has all the work that is going on at the organizational level, be it workplace, volunteer work, community, universities, and then we should not forget the adult learner. So it's this middle ground that we're going to look at. It's a simplified version of all the complex ways in which a lot of things are said sometimes. And the goal of the UNESCO program is learning from global diversity across North and South. So we're dealing with about 177 countries, but we're going gradually. We sometimes have meetings with 23 countries, or we have a synthesis report where we have commissioned studies in 44 countries, etc. So it's a very incremental approach that we have. We establish a sustainable research network, and our research entails benchmarking, the interaction, the comparative analysis of top-down and bottom-up approaches, and then establishing typologies of recognition pathways, and what is the added value. I think that is very significant about this research project. What is the added value? It's just not recognition, but also the interlinkages. We had a meeting recently in Hamburg with 23 countries, and we came up with a typology of participating countries. You have countries with established practices, and then you have countries where recognition practices are established, but they also focus at basic levels of education. In Europe, in the European context, I think a lot of recognition takes place at the post-secondary. It's subsumed under the post-secondary education. And then you have a group of countries where recognition is operational according to references that are adapted to the large informal and non-formal education sectors. I mean, if you think of countries like Bhutan, Burkina Faso, Gambia, Ghana, India, Jordan, and Syria, we're really trying to disseminate good established practices from North countries to a lot of countries who have the demand, but they do not know how to go about it. The way forward, despite completely different contextual features, collaborative research is helpful in clarifying implementation processes within national learning systems. I think our approach is really at the level of national learning cultures. We're looking at different national learning cultures across the world. Research strategy is national reports on the linkages, showing the many roads with their critical success factors. And then we have partner conferences. We have a lot of snowball effects. A lot of countries are saying we are ready to host a stakeholder meeting in India or in Korea or in Mauritius. So things are snowballing now. And we have our other strategy is not only to come up with very elaborate national reports, but also to have peer learning activities which are based on particular thematics. And at the meeting in Hamburg, people expressed their interest in talking about purposes and policy objectives, how they are linked, and how to do, how to implement, and what is the impact. I think people really want to know these things from a broader perspective in national learning systems. And to debate, we've come up with draft UNESCO guidelines on RPL, and these are going to be debated at the national stakeholder meetings. We have, at the end of the day, an overview of international best practice. We are coming up with communities of practice, developing handbooks for policymakers, for practitioners, and for learners, for citizens, the lifelong learning citizen, and of course open source knowledge methodologies. I must say that my participation in this conference is really giving me motivation to go back and think about disseminating and sharing this practice in a more organized way. And I think with this interaction with Gail Hall and with others in this conference, it's really going to take fruit. UNESCO guidelines on non-formal and informal learning focus on the culture of lifelong learning. It's not just one area, not just the labor force, not just NGOs, but it is the national learning system and how they are supporting lifelong learning and this interaction with national qualification framework by building a culture of lifelong learning, guidance, credit systems, pathways, transitions, handbooks, etc., guides for practice, and also awareness creation. And guidelines are seen as a way this culture can be established. And we think that the guidelines, by distributing these guidelines around and to have debate and discussion around these guidelines, will already make people think about this culture of lifelong learning. The purpose is to assist the different organizations making up the learning society in developing their specific role in the learning society. And the implementation strategy after 2011 is we're going to have an annual conference, yearly updating of guidelines, and UNESCO training program for capacity building. Website with open source material, communities of practice. And these are some of the analytical articles that have been written on the subject. It is, you can go through them if you want to. And thank you very much. I was delighted to be here and to share with you about my organization.
Good morning, everybody. How frustrating is it to have spent some time to develop learning programmes or indeed processes for the recognition of prior learning, only to find that somebody else has done it before you and that you could have called on that information? And how equally frustrating is it, particularly for learners, to be asked to do something all over again, albeit in a different context? My name is Margaret Cameron, as Gail said, and I'm the manager at the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework Partnership. And I have no skills here, and there we go. And the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework Partnership is the organisation that manages the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, or as we know it, SCQF, and it's Scotland's lifelong learning framework, which has the ability and the capacity to recognise all kinds of learning, whether that's formal learning, informal learning, or indeed non-formal learning. I was asked to talk on sustainability through national and international sharing, and in my attempt to address this, I'll try to explain what we are doing to reduce, reuse and recycle. But in order to do that, I do need to put it within the Scottish context, and I'll give you some examples of some of the materials that we've developed and that we're currently developing, and our hopes for RPL in Scotland. Scottish context. Scotland is very lucky in that it does have a national qualifications framework. It is a voluntary framework, it's a descriptive framework, it's not a regulatory framework, and it's not linked to funding, which is very important. That said, the SCQF has robust quality assurance systems and is central to our education and training in Scotland. When the framework was established in 2001, it was established from the bottom up, basically. It was higher education that approached ScotVec and the Scottish Education Board at that time and said, we have a credit framework in higher education. Wouldn't it be nice to bring them all together in an integrated framework? And so that's how it was developed, and the aim was always learner-centred. It was always at the centre of the framework was the benefit to the learner. And so it has two aims, and it remains the two aims that has been in place since its development. It assists people of all ages and all circumstances to access appropriate education and training over their lifetime to reach their potential, whether that's economic or whether it's their personal potential. It also has the aim is to enable employers and others, public in general, to understand the full range of Scottish qualifications and how they relate to each other, and how different types of qualifications and learning programmes can contribute to the improvement of the skills of the workforce. And this is my representation of the SCQF. And as you can see, it's central to our education system. We have vocational education, school qualifications, college qualifications, university qualifications, all recognised on the SCQF, all have a level and all have credit value. And that's how our system is developed. When our SQA, our Scottish Qualifications Authority, develop provision, they use the level descriptors as the guide. In addition to this, there are other agendas that the SCQF can contribute to and significantly contribute to in terms of career and personal development, the recognition of prior learning, work-based learning, community learning and development, and recruitment and selection. And indeed, we're encouraging employers to advertise their job vacancies using the SCQF as the guidance, because employers don't generally know. They say degree or equivalent, but when you ask them what equivalent is, they don't know. If anybody's interested in finding out more about the framework in general, I would be happy to talk to them after this session, but my focus today is on the recognition of prior learning. And the guidelines for RPL are within our SCQF handbook, which is the purple book down at the front of the table. And the RPL guidelines form part of the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, and they were established after a national consultation. We consulted on everything in Scotland, and these were developed in 2005. The guidelines set out two types of recognition. One is formative recognition for career and personal development and doesn't have the award of credit, but can be the first stage in getting that award. And then the summative recognition for credit towards the qualification. This is the definition that we've come up with for RPL in Scotland, and I'll explain a little bit about how we came up to that definition. And we've said that RPL is the process for recognising learning that has its source in experience and or previous formal, non-formal and informal contexts. Within the handbook, the formal context are catered for really through the credit transfer guidelines. And so there's credit transfer available for when somebody has achieved a formal qualification, the credit's there, and you can use that credit to contribute to other learning if you want to. And the non-traditional qualifications and learning programmes also that have credit rated, the credit from that could be transferred into other programmes. In 2007, I've got here 1997, I'm thinking, gosh, that's not right. It's 2007. We commissioned a report on the state of play of RPL in Scotland. And we affectionately refer to this report as the Inspire Scotland report after the consultants that conducted the work. And what they did was that they had a few suggestions for us. And first of all, they said that we should build the business case for RPL about why sectors and why employers and why colleges and universities should implement RPL within their organisations. That we should remove inconsistencies and clarify language, provide more flexibility in the curriculum to take account of different learning experiences, and gain the commitment from institutional leaders who could influence their organisations. And that we should improve understanding of RPL by working with key sectors. The SCQF partnership could not take any of this forward on their own. It needed to work together with colleagues in the many sectors, from the higher education sector, the college sector, and employers and training providers. And this is what I want to share with you today. To assist sustainability, we set up an RPL network to work closely with the sectors and the other networks, such as the Network for Higher Education, RPL Network for Higher Education in Scotland. And our aim was to increase the understanding and awareness and use of RPL across all stakeholders to encourage take-up by learners. And the first thing we did in order to clarify that language was to try and set up the definition of RPL. And that definition that I've given you before took us several meetings to come to an agreed definition, because we were all coming with RPL from different perspectives and different understandings. And we found that round the table, this group of practitioners who thought they'd been talking about the same thing for many years actually hadn't. The representatives on this network have been asked now to produce a business case for their own sector. Business case causes some consternation with some organisations. However, so why bother? Why bother with RPL? And we'll be holding a network event to this end in Edinburgh on the 18th of November when I go back. The SDQF partnership has been organising that event, and we've been taking forward and doing all the administration of it, but the programme has actually been developed by the practitioners on the network itself, and that way we've helped to reduce the workload and the amount of time needed by any one organisation. A few years ago, in 2006, the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework was involved with the development, working together with the Scottish Social Services Council in the development of a toolkit for shall we say, triple SC, it's easier to get round my tongue, triple SC. And their work was led by the fact that the social services sector in Scotland became a regulated profession. And so what we had there was people who were working within the sector who had perhaps no qualifications but a great deal of experience. And here they were needing now to be registered, and the level of the qualification they needed was SCQF level 7, which is comparable with our first year university or our higher national certificates. And so you can imagine the feeling of individuals there within the sector, and the feeling of fear of having to sit this qualification, an SVQ, a Scottish Vocational Qualification 3, which sits at level 7, 6 and 7, just to complicate things. So the social services sector developed a specific toolkit to help people to be able to provide evidence of their learning to meet the learning outcomes of the SVQ. It was a specific toolkit. It was particularly for that sector. It was not about giving credit. They still had to sit the whole SVQ because it's observed learning. But it helped the individuals to reflect on that learning and to provide evidence from other areas and from the work that they had achieved. This helped people to achieve the qualification quicker than they would normally have done. So the SCQF partnership, we liked this tool, and we decided that we should have a generic toolkit. And so we would reuse and recycle this toolkit, that we would strip it down. And we stripped it down to be very basic in terms of genericizing it. And we're also now working with Skills Development Scotland to develop a toolkit for school pupils. So the toolkit is there, and what it covers, this is where the URL is. It covers, first of all, what is the recognition of prior learning. It helps to explain that to the facilitators within the organisations that are working with learners, to just explain what RPL is. It talks about the benefits of RPL to employers, to learners, to organisations. and how it can be used, how RPL can be used in the workplace. The second chapter makes a specific link of RPL to the Scottish framework, and it explains the RPL process and explains the 5 principles of learner-focused, accessible, flexible, reliable, consistent and transparent, and quality assured. Section 3 explains how RPL can be used for personal and career development and for entry to learning programmes and for the award of credit. And Section 4 provides information for facilitators to help them to support learners through that process, and provides annexes with activities that can be photocopied and adapted for specific circumstances. We view the toolkit as extremely useful in helping to facilitate for facilitators to take learners through that process. However, there is a need for training, and when I was here last year, it really pointed out to me just how much we do need some training in RPL within Scotland. And so I've been working very closely with my colleagues in the University of West of Scotland, who are very experienced in taking people through the RPL process, much more so in that particular university than perhaps some of the colleges are. And so we're developing a workshop, and we have set out the learning outcomes for that, and I was very pleased to be able to send them to Gail to have them look at that, to have her look at that and provide comment from a different perspective, and so that international sharing of experience was very useful. The plans are that we will pilot this one-day's workshop at the end of this year, and that we will be able to present to the Learning and Teaching Committee of the University. My colleague Julia Kavanagh is working to genericise still, or to make more specific, I suppose, the workshop for learners that within the school sector who are not achieving. And she's working very closely with Skills Development Scotland, our careers guidance sector. And we call these young people in school more choices, more chances young people. And sometimes they're referred to in other organisations or other areas as the Not in Education, Employment or Training Group. So we're hoping that that would be the case, that that will help young people to help them to plan where they're going to be and where their journey is going to be. So basically Scotland is working very hard, but it has a very long way to go to promote RPL. It's still not something that's embedded really within the system. And it reminds me of a story that I once heard of a hot summer's day when Michelangelo was chipping away at a large piece of rock, and a young boy asked him what he was doing and why he was doing it. And Michelangelo replied, well, there's an angel inside and he wants to come out. And today, of course, we have beautiful David in Florence. To me, that's a very small way, like what RPL is within Scotland. We chip away at it one brick at a time, one chip at a time. And for example, we have the guidelines, we have the framework, we have the workshops, we have the conferences, and eventually, one day learners will benefit much more than they do now, and RPL will be the standard practice where all learning, no matter where it's achieved or how it's achieved, can be recognised. Thank you.
Okay, polite pause while you note that down.
It'll be on the slides, then it'll be posted too.
Good morning from here. It's probably good afternoon halfway around the world, and probably good evening in some places. I want to share with you some work that's been done by a European project. The European project itself is sharing because it's a transfer of innovation project funded by the European Commission and involving 7 countries and working together. The project is called Apple Bud, and that name comes about because APL, I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with now, but bud is the Polish word, the Polish root word for construction. And so this is a project to bring APL to the Polish construction industry. And you'll see that we've got a nice little apple bud on our logo down in the bottom left. just so as to show that we construction people can be soft and gentle and helpful as well. In the project, we were starting off with a country in Poland which has not got a tradition of accreditation and prior learning, and so it was one of the things we wanted to do first of all was to find examples of good practice from around the world and develop case studies from which we could learn as a project and which we could pluck the best things from in the system that we were setting up in Poland. And that's why I was very happy when Gail asked if we would share anything. This seemed to us to be the best thing that we could share straight away. The other things that the project has done, which we're also very happy to share with people, but is not so immediately accessible, we did a mapping of foreign qualifications against Polish construction qualifications, and we also looked then at what the barriers to mutual recognition are. And for anybody who's done that sort of work, they'll know that they're many and various and probably best avoided. We then moved on to developing the model that we would use for the APL within the Polish construction industry. And one of the first things we had to do was to train APL assessors, and so our Romanian colleagues developed a course with, well, first of all, we agreed the competencies that an APL assessor needs to have, and they're over and above those that a traditional assessor needs to have. And then the Romanians, having developed the competence framework, then developed the training course for that. And then, as well as having the pilots in Poland of the new process, we also held pilots in some of the other partner countries in order to see how easy it was for Polish expatriate workers to develop, to have their prior learning recognized within those other countries. Because most of the countries had APL systems, but they were mostly very much focused on their own nationals. So we carried out pilots in another 5 countries, and those are just coming to an end now and being written up. And then the last thing that the project did, and again this is still work in progress, is to start to make plans for a Polish body for APL. Because one of the great successes of the project has been great interest from the ministries, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labour, and the Ministry of Infrastructure. And in fact, at one stage we were slightly worried that they were vying to be more dominant in the project, but it was a reflection of the great interest and support that was coming. So, looking at the international case studies, which is what I want to share with everybody, we've got case studies in there from Belgium, the Czech Republic, from Germany, France, Italy, Romania, UK, and you'll be delighted to hear from Canada as well. And that's more countries than we had in the partnership, as you can see. And the case studies were some of them at national level, some at regional level, some of them were construction sector projects, some of them were from projects. Sorry, some of them were from the construction sector and some of them were from projects. And so there's a big variety, but what we've tried to do is publish them in a standard format so that it's easier to pluck the information from them and to compare and contrast them. And in addition to that, we've got an introduction at the beginning which tries to draw out some general themes and interesting things. What we asked people to put into the case studies were the institutional setup, and that of course is very important and very varied. With things like what regulators, what awarding bodies, which social partners were taking part. And we found the social partners taking part is very important. The project, the Applebud project, was a collaborative effort of the Polish Construction Trades Union and the Polish Construction Employers Federation. and that made things work wonderfully. And then we had the Government Research Institute working alongside those two. We give in the case studies the QA arrangements, the responsibilities, and also where the guidance and counselling comes from, and what stages it happens. And certainly we found that the guidance and counselling in our own pilots was the most difficult, because there was not a great tradition of guidance and counselling for this sort of area. What motivation? Jolly important, the drivers of what happens. And then a section about sustainability, what sort of numbers are happening, because with projects it's very easy to, it's not very easy, it is possible to get a handful of people with enormous effort to go through a process, but that's not the same as one of the projects I heard about yesterday, which had got 1,300 people through, and that's much more sustainable. So sustainability is jolly important. And then, as I said, there's an overarching little discussion, a comparative analysis of these APL systems. And we will be putting it up on the website, applebud.eu. That will have all the results of the project, and they'll all be able to... They're not all on there yet, because all this is very much work in progress, as all good things that are shared should be. So please don't be too critical if you find that there's the odd spelling mistake or anything like that. And Jakub Kus at the trades union Budowlani, he is the project manager and the contractor, and so you can contact him. His English is excellent. Marta Lloyd is the project manager, and then I'm the UK partner. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. Isn't this exciting? I just get, find it so great when you start being able to share this kind of thing. I want to just give you a little bit of a sample from Australia. When we looked at sharing some of these resources, we looked at the facilitator guide that Scotland has done and put up in terms of making it a more generic guide than what had originally been done for the social services. And in Australia, they have an assessor guide. And again, Australia's system is national in scope, even though they have state education systems. But they have done some marvelous work in terms of national resources that are available to all of their facilitators and assessors through the college systems and on their websites. This particular assessor guide is actually, you'll note, intended for trained assessors. It's not intended for training, but for trained assessors that have some basic knowledge of RPL to begin with, but it gives them a resource to help them think about things in another way, with some examples and some forms that might help in terms of consistency. There's no way you can copy down that website, but when you get the slides, you will be able to link on it. And just the overview of what they have in here. The first part of it is understanding recognition, so that again it's the basics, and some of this you'll see similarity to what is in the Scottish handbook. The second one, they actually have a 6-step recognition model. We all talk about different phases of going through the RPL process. They have theirs identified into 6 steps. And then they also have in here an assessor's self-assessment in terms of continued competency, which is an excellent resource as well. And then their third section is resources for recognition and reference. So they have sample tools, further reading websites, and coming back again to the fact that we don't yet have consistent terminology, the definitions that they use within Australia for the things that are there. I also want to mention, though, because one of the things that sort of draws this together is that within their section 2, when they talk about the different steps of the model, they use case studies. So the thought about what Nigel has brought forth in terms of some of these best practice case studies, they'll talk about the step in the model and then they'll bring in a case study to describe that or explain that. So it's kind of showing how these different resources can be used. Again, once you get the slides, there are some additional resources from Australia. Some of these are actually, they have some videos where assessors are talking about using resources and some of the challenges and benefits that they had in there. So just bringing this together because I'd like to leave a little bit of room for questions that you may have of the panel. But the next steps with IPLAN would be to continue with discussions on question and answers on the RFL discussion board, and also so that you can, if you have additional questions in terms of resources, would like to find out if somebody has resources on a particular topic, etc., this can be used as a central location. One of the things that our international group wanted or suggested that might be valuable is that we're able to list some of the conferences, workshops, other kinds of activities that are happening in Canada and globally, and put a link to that information. We're not reinventing here. We're putting links to make it, trying to find the information in an available fashion. So if you know of international workshops, etc., or in Canada that internationals might want to participate in, please let us know. And again, we're going to try and do another webcast in early 2011 in cooperation with the Education and Training Committee, looking here probably at standards and guidelines in RPL, and another one, there's interest because of RPL practitioner competencies, taking a look at the profiles in various countries and seeing what can be done from there. So just in sort of summarizing this, I think a couple of comments from yesterday, a number of speakers were talking about the fact about how the world is shrinking and the fact that we live now in a very global community, and that we really have to take some of our ideas and challenges and solutions on a global basis. And I think the more we can share the resources and not have to reinvent, the easier it will be for us to do that. And I'd just like to share, Olivia's not here this morning, but at dinner last night she made a comment that I thought was just wonderful, right, Joy? She talked about this as that with RPL, she said, we have birthed a baby. She said, we brought this baby into the world, and she said, we have a responsibility with this baby to clothe it and feed it and nurture it and bring it to the best possible future. And I thought, what a wonderful analogy that was. So I leave you with that. We would open for questions from you, and I think according to this, we also have some questions from those on the webcast. Okay, this is a question to Margaret. And the question is there any involvement of APL among employees? And the second one was for Margaret too, Corey? Well, let's do one at a time here. Margaret, do you want to?
APL among employees, yes.
And employers.
And employers, yes. Particularly.
Can you come to the mic for those who are?
Look my way.
Yes.
Yes, there are examples of APEL with employers. When I worked in the university sector, there was some APEL cases with British Aerospace, where people were able to gain 300 credit towards their 360 credit degree programme. And so they only had to do 4 modules of 15 credits each in order to graduate with a degree. And there are examples of employees within the social services sector. So there's more awareness of RPL, but it certainly needs to be increased. And we have the social services sector representative on the group, the RPL network, in order to try and heighten that within the sectors. But there are examples. What's the other question?
Well, probably it's a good addition to that is they want to know if there's a difference in certificates obtained after formal education and through APL assessment.
No, it's not. There's no difference in the certificates that's obtained. It's the same certificate. And because it's a credit system that we have in Scotland, and people are awarded the credit, and it's on that basis that the award is made. and there's no difference in the certificates that would be awarded to the recipients of these awards.
Now, here's an interesting question, and I leave this open for anybody that may have an answer. They want to know whether there are any countries or states or provinces that have legislation for RPL. Now, I take this that it may be legislation that means that institutions need to have RPL incorporated? Madhu?
Yes, I think across Europe, most countries have legislation on RPL, and they're embedded in their education reform systems. For example, Norway has the competence reform, and it includes the legislation on the right of every individual to get his prior learning assessed and certified, etc. Was that the question, I think? And all countries in Europe, as a matter of fact, have now come up with the legislation on RPL. Not Scotland, okay. And even countries in the south, for example. I mean, broadly speaking, at least people are coming up with mechanisms for recognizing non-formal and informal learning. And they're also part of lifelong learning strategies in these countries. So it's embedded in policy reforms. And a lot of South countries, like, I don't know, maybe I think Mauritius has a legislation on RPL. But I think these are the things we are trying to now collect also in our case studies.
Great. Other comment, Nigel?
Just a very brief comment that I think there's very different traditions in different countries, so that some countries like to put things into legislation very quickly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they happen. Other countries are much less formal, and I know that UK doesn't have legislation, but you try to get it to happen, so it's in policy. And there's just very often a huge difference between what is in legislation and what is actually happening on the ground.
Good comment. Are there questions from the group in here of any of our members of the panel? Let me ask you a question. Are there particular areas or resources or other areas of sharing that you would like to see happen through the international network, or things that you would like to see put up for discussion? Future webcasts or anything else? Nigel?
Sorry, bad penny returns. I'm very keen that there should be common projects across countries. I know that from our Apple Bud project, there's been a huge amount of learning across the 7 countries that have taken part. And I would dearly like to see some projects where it's relatively easy to have European projects in RPL. It's a priority for European funding, and we can do that. What we can't do is provide funding for people who are from outside. But if you can get funding for yourselves to take part in the project, I'm certain that we can find you a project that would welcome you with open arms and include you as part of the project. We have a phrase for it in Europe. It's called a silent partner. But silent partners are not allowed to be silent. All that happens is they don't get any money from Europe. So if you'd like to be a noisy, silent partner, then I can almost guarantee that we can find a project that would welcome you with open arms. And that's not just Canada, that's around the world.
Thanks. And possibly through something like through IPLAN, we can get a little more overall support in that. Actually, one of the other things that's quite interesting is now where there are starting to be more RPL networks starting in different countries, so that we can start to link through there. Madhu, the question in terms of the UNESCO guidelines, and are they available online? The guidelines for RPL? And are they different from the European guidelines?
These guidelines are available, and I could make them available on this web page, but at the moment we have restricted the distribution of these guidelines to the research network that we've formed recently at the Hamburg meeting, and these guidelines are going to be discussed at national stakeholder consultations, which are happening actually at the moment. And I think, but I would be delighted to put them on the web page.
And are they different from the EU guidelines?
I think they're a little more holistic, but we're working together with the European Commission on these guidelines. But I think there is a different accent because here we're dealing with more on the North-South dialogue. We're dealing with countries which RPL and how to disseminate recognition in South countries. So the problematic there is very different. So we have to take into account things like levels that are lower than secondary education, or we have to take into account recognition in the informal economy. And these are the sort of things that are not appearing in the European Commission. So we have to make things explicit which are not very explicit in the European Commission. But we definitely have the European guidelines as our benchmark because it is a very good guideline. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to finish, there's just a comment here talking about how wonderful it would be to share assessors' guides because some countries don't have a traditional understanding of RPL, and it would help in training of assessors. So I think we'll bring this to a close right now. If I could just suggest that each of you, if you're interested in getting a specific email after this, when we have things up and with the web page, there is at the registration desk, there's an area to sign up, a page to sign up for the IPLAN. If you'd like to put your information down there, we'll make sure that we get a specific email out to you indicating where you can access these resources. So I would like to thank everybody for being here today, and particularly those who've joined us from other places around the globe. We can't see you, but it's wonderful to have your participation. And I would like to give a special thanks to our international panel here for what they have shared and the start of further sharing. Thank you very much, folks.